All right, another episode of the Conveyor Podcast. We have today John Richards here, being able to talk about the Startup Ignition Academy Bootcamp Investment Fund based out of Utah. Very excited to hear about his 40 years as an entrepreneur, 30 years as an angel investor, and over a decade teaching at universities before ultimately becoming the managing partner of Startup Ignition. Really excited to hear from him. Obviously lots of experience and a huge amount of ideas we can go through around community and communication. So welcome today, John.
Great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So first things first here. So Startup Ignition is a very robust organization. You have an online AI academy. You have that uses AI to help people go through the lean startup methodology. You have an investment fund that sounds like you said about 600 startups have gone through that. And on top of that, you have the boot camp. That's a live in-person boot camp there in Utah. So what was the vision? How did you come up with this vision when you started Startup Ignition?
Well, Startup Ignition, about the late 2000s, around 2010 or so. So I taught at a major university for about 12 years through the 2000s. And around 2010, a couple things happened. First of all, lean startup hit the scene. And that was a codified way of doing a startup instead of just guessing and whimsically going about startups. We got the codification of methodology and process that works. It's entrepreneurial science. And then also there was the advent of what we call boot camps. And even though that word's been used for decades or centuries, a boot camp around 2010 emerged as a way to instill skills training and knowledge. Instead of through a university and a 4-year degree, you could attend approximately a 90-day boot camp and from been there, done it experts and achieve skills and master skills. So for instance, there was a huge wave of coding boot camps. A lot of people were in low-paying jobs and they wanted to become a software engineer. Do I go get a 4-year degree if I'm 30 years old from a university, or how can I do that? No, I'm 30 years old. I'll go to a 90-day boot camp, learn how to code in the JavaScript tech stack and React and Angular and all these languages that were really popular and still are. And I can go for 90 days and go from having a $25,000 a year job to an $85,000 a year job, and do that in 90 days. And that was kind of a modern day boot camp. That concept of imbuing skills in 90 days really caught my attention because I was teaching at a university and a lot of people started saying to me, you have this life-changing curriculum. It helps people really do entrepreneurship correctly. You should put it out in the community so you don't have to be matriculated to a top university and wait till your senior year to get a chance to take your class. You should put it out in the community and have anybody be able to take it in a boot camp format. So somebody gave me that idea and I went and tested it using lean startup principles and found out, yes, there's a business model for it. And we launched it, and in 2 days, the first cohort filled up, and that was 10 years ago. And every 3 months, we have a new class of around 20 entrepreneurs that go through it. And that's how it started.
How does that marry in with the investing that you've done as an angel, and then also the fund that you use?
Well, obviously, it's well known that the teacher often learns the most. So by teaching this way too, I keep my skills sharpened. I sharpen my saw all the time and keep up on current activities in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that helps me be a better investor. And then I have been an angel investor for 25 to 30 years. And so having this boot camp, even it's not intended to be a finding source for my investing, but it's turned out that way sometimes. I've invested in some of the companies that have gone through. That's never a guarantee for any participant, but it's created a place where, yeah, certainly the people learn how to do companies well, and then their company is doing well, and I invest in it, and that's happened, and that's something. So there is obviously a connection. And then when we launched our bona fide venture fund, not just being an angel investor, but launched a venture fund, then what happened was, we're looking to do due diligence on these companies, we say, hey, we got this boot camp coming up. Since we do it every 3 months, it'd be great if you attended this boot camp, and then we could really get to know each other and help you really see where your startup's at and see if it's investable. And that's turned out to be a really good yin and yang situation.
So one of the main focuses of this podcast is to talk about communications. And by communications, I'm talking about casting your vision, leading, organizing your relationships and connections, and trying to get the job done, trying to accomplish what you want to accomplish, or educate people around the things that you want, your specific subject matter expertise. And so hearing from you as someone who is not just a practitioner of business, but also an educator, someone who's in university talking about entrepreneurship, I realized that the phenomenon of sort of the startup entrepreneurship language, the ethos, the way that people communicate and get businesses off the ground has really formalized in the last 10, 15 years or so. And so what was it like beforehand trying to do this work? I know that it still happened. What was it like beforehand when there wasn't even really a commonly known language to be able to?
This is such a great question you're asking. I was hoping you would ask it, because for those of your listeners or viewers that don't know what Lean Startup is, Lean Startup hit because a gentleman named Steve Blank sold his company and went to teach at Stanford and Berkeley as an adjunct professor. And when he went there, he found out that they were teaching entrepreneurship incorrectly, and he devised a way to go from agile development in the technology world. Agile development was a way to quickly iterate and develop products. But it turned out that we needed a way to quickly, in an agile way, quickly develop companies. And so he codified a process called Lean Startup. And at the same time he was doing that, and he wrote a book that's now legendary, and brought Lean Startup to the world. At the same time, there was another fellow in Switzerland named Alex Osterwalder, who was coming up with the idea for a way to track your progress in developing a company. And he called it the business model canvas, a 9-segmented, 1-page visual way to represent the development of a business model in a company. And Steve Blank's work and Alex Osterwalder's work got together and brought forth this incredible new language. And so you're talking about communications. Lean Startup's probably #1 contribution to the world is creating a common language. If you go back to the old biblical story of the Tower of Babel, where, whether you believe it or not, that's not important. The story is that the world spoke one language, and then the languages got confounded, and people started speaking different languages, and then started warring and attacking and killing each other. And so what's interesting is, in the inverse, what Lean Startup has done in the venture and entrepreneurial ecosystem is given us a common language. And when you have a common language, you can instantly and quickly understand what the other parties are talking about, and you can deal with complex business situations very simply and quickly because of a common language. And there's now you said lingo, there's an entire common language around the process of developing a startup venture, and it's really changed the process. So beforehand, the process was literally whimsical in some ways. I'm going to be a startup entrepreneur, and you would be talking about your idea, you're talking about your process of developing the company, and the other parties in the ecosystem, the other stakeholders like investors or employees or suppliers and all sorts of things, wouldn't know what you were talking about and what you were developing, because they might have had different connotations and meanings to different words. And now we have literally a glossary that everybody knows what the language means, and we can then have meetings and discussions and go at lightning speed compared to before. So before, slow, meandering, different meanings to different words. After Lean Startup, communication on steroids, common language, common understanding and connotations of what everything means and what we should be about doing. And that made all the difference in the world. So, to borrow from the movie Grease, it's Grease lightning post lean startup than before lean startup.
Yeah, it's my understanding that business in the past, before entrepreneurship and the idea of, it's not so much, I think it's maybe the movement from entrepreneurship to startup language.
Yes.
And so what Steve Blank with the Lean Startup did was introduce these common terms that can be understood across any type of business. Things like pivoting, product market fit, churn, traction.
And before Quinn, what we had was this. For 100 years before that, at least 80 years, the top MBA programs, the top business schools in the country just taught that entrepreneurship was a miniaturized version of a corporation. So if you take a 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 mega corporation and just miniaturize the processes and use the same language they use, that'll work in a startup, which is not right. That actually kills a startup. For instance, all the disciplines you find in a business school, from organizational behavior, accounting, finance, supply chain, all of the different pieces, business management, all the majors in a business school, what they did for 80 years was just say, entrepreneurship is just miniaturizing the same language and processes. And we had 90+% failure rate. Well, it didn't work. And there's been tons and massive research on this academically and found out the whys and whats of all of it. And then what's interesting, what Lean Startup has done in creating this common language is we actually don't do expensive things. We do quick validating things. And we do fail. Human ideas still fail at the same rate, but we're launching less businesses on bad ideas. We're pivoting to good ideas and good business models before we launch companies, instead of just launching a company without validating it and then it fails. And the language we use was from corporate world. And you're exactly right. It's so fun to be on your podcast today, because communication is literally the greatest contribution of Lean Startup to the world, in my opinion. Even though there's a lot of other elements to it, the common language and the ability to communicate effectively has made the difference.
I think in business, especially when it comes to, so I didn't know where our talk was going to go, but I think it's really around this idea of founding things or launching a new business. That's obviously your key strength, your contribution to the world of entrepreneurship and to business. And this whole idea of getting out, one of Steve Blank's thing is get out of the building. The idea, the notion of getting out of the building. And you said,
talk to people.
And talk to people. And
don't sit in your cubicle choosing colors for your logo and in your apartment at a computer. There's legions of 20-something and 30-something entrepreneurs sitting in their apartment, pretending to be an entrepreneur, playing entrepreneur by doing things that don't involve other humans, and they're actually not doing much. They're not getting much done. What you want to be doing as an entrepreneur is talking and communicating with humans up, down, sideways in your ecosystem, and that's how you get to real answers and pivot to winning business models.
There's this great meme. It's a picture of the old way of doing business, which is this MBA mini large corporate organization theory, which is we're trying to build a rocket ship. Every business wants to be a rocket ship, or let's say a car. Let's use a car as an analogy. And it says phase 1, add wheels. Phase 2, add a chassis. Phase 3, add an engine. And then you have a car. And then in the other picture, it says you want to get to a car eventually. We're going to do a skateboard phase 1. We're going to do a bicycle phase 2. Because it's complete in each version. You're trying to find an additional step.
It's a viable product, right?
Viable.
Yeah. And that's really interesting and key. Yep, I like it.
So, what's a unique insight you can provide entrepreneurs, folks in business who who want to think more about their communications. So when you see good pitches or bad pitches, or folks who are more product oriented but maybe are bad salespeople, what is one of the biggest gaps in
Okay, well,
communication?
let me go back and do some teachings if that's okay. So we really focus on fit. And what does that mean? There's lots of different types of fit. You just mentioned product market fit, which is kind of that when you found product market fit is the same thing as saying I validated my business model. And that's kind of the crowning capper last step of the lean startup process. So let's go back and talk about before that, we have to have a lot of other fits, like our idea needs to have a problem solution fit. Is what problem is it solving, and what solution do you have, and do those fit together? Then you also have to have product promise fit, like the product has the promise that it can solve a need. We need to go validate that, but do we feel there's promise there? But one of the most important fits is also founder market fit. Founder market fit is where the founders of a startup company have great fit to the vertical space in which they're going to launch a startup. This is really important. The more founder fit, the more likelihood of success. And what does that mean? A founder fit means that the founders have a healthy obsession with the industry or specific niche in which they're going to operate. Whether they came from that because they had a job in that, which is great, or they do a deep dive, and it's back to communication. When a strong founder market fit is indicated by this healthy obsession, and they know all of the lingo and the internal language of that niche or industry that they're wanting to go into. Like, it's terrible if you have 3 college guys start a company and say, they're going to go into an industry, and they have no idea on the language, they have no background, they've done no research and study, and they want to start a business in something just because they think they can get rich from it. No, a founder market fit is when the founders, either by their past experience or because they overtly decided to go in and educate themselves, they learn the language, the way of doing things, who the players are, and they learn, quote unquote, the communication methods and language of that niche and industry. It's literally what you want is founder market fit, to where that founder is so knowledgeable that they start getting invited to be speakers at industry conferences. That's the kind of founder that makes it in a business. It's not somebody who's just plain entrepreneur and says, oh, I heard that it's a good idea to start a business in this industry, I'm going to go start it and just try to launch and get into it. And they have no networking, no connections, no communication skills, no idea of the glossary and language of the industry. And they're going to find their hill that they have to climb is like this. When you have strong founder market fit, the hill starts becoming less of a slope to climb. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that I want to caveat what you're saying by saying there's absolutely outliers. There's people who have far left field ideas that are successful. It's just more around the likelihood of them being successful. And
yeah, well, yeah, if they disrupt an industry, they can, but still, to make a break into the industry, the more founder fit they have with knowledge about that industry, they can then introduce a disruption that changes everything too. That's true. I agree with that.
And I work with quote unquote subject matter experts. So that's a way for me to say that these are folks who either have earned insights around their specific industry. So they've worked for 20 or 30 years in a space or in an earlier industry, say Web3 or crypto. They've been in the space for about 5 years. And in spaces like cryptocurrency, the language is moving so fast, the internet memes, the updates, whether it's policy at the highest level or just grassroots in Telegram or WhatsApp groups, you have to be eating, sleeping, breathing it in order to sound like you're native to that space. And so I 100% agree with you around founder market fit. For folks
Awesome.
who
And by the way, you did ask, I just got to say this because I do have an appointment after this. I know we got started a few minutes late. So I probably have about 5 minutes, and I apologize for that. So let's keep going. I want you just to have I want you to get done what you want to get done. So let's keep
going. No worries, John. So tell me about your specific community. You've got a lot. You have a very integrated entrepreneurship hub. You have online. You have your online classes. You have your in-person boot camp. How do you think about communications, particularly around growing, improving your culture over time with what you're doing?
Yeah, it's integral, right? So just as an instructor, as you know, I was named one of the top 25 entrepreneurial professors at one point in the country. And so teaching entrepreneurship, you need to have pretty significant communication skills, and helping your students learn those skills as well. One of the interesting things is that entrepreneurship is a people issue, and being able to communicate your ideas effectively and communicate what you mean on a startup team is really important. So communication is at the root of being able to imbue and instruct this content and knowledge. And then in the recipient, the student learning these things, that student needs to learn exactly how to communicate amongst a founding team. The reality is this: poor communication in the startup world amongst founding teams is probably responsible for about 2/3 of all the implosion of founding teams. About half of all founding teams in the first year have major interpersonal problems due largely to communication. For instance, just one of the first tasks is, what percentage of the company are each of us going to have when we start this venture? How do we figure that out? How do we communicate about it? Most people think it's so awkward, they avoid the conversation. And then all of a sudden they haven't really finalized things, and they find out, oh, my idea has traction. I've got an interested customer. I've got an interested investor. And all of a sudden the human emotions of greed and fear of missing out or fear of loss start interplaying in this group of founders, and they don't know how to address and communicate effectively and be forthright. And all of a sudden, they're just resentment and envy starts creeping in, which is really bad. And then the team implodes and we have problems. Matter of fact, in my life experience, 90% of all the litigation in the entrepreneurial world is founder to founder.
Wow. Yeah. And
litigation is probably the worst example of human communication, right? Once you start litigating, humans are told you can't talk to each other. You can only talk through other people to each other. So guess how fast stuff happens then? Very slow, meandering, and expensively. There's a book by one of my friends named Stephen M. R. Covey, the son of Stephen R. Covey. He wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And where relationships and communication have trust, they go fast and inexpensively. Where they have mistrust, it's slow and expensive.
Yeah, and I think that trust is something that takes an incredible amount of time to nurture and build up, and that it's very hard to rebuild back sometimes.
Once lost,
I trust over communicating, making sure you are really empathizing with the person you're communicating with. You're explaining in plain spoken words, not to impress them, people
don't care what you know until they know you care, right?
Yeah.
My wife teaches me that all the time.
Another one that I think is really important is people love to buy things they hate to be sold to as well.
Yeah.
Which is a giant reason why I think in Hollywood, you think of salespeople and entrepreneurs as generally being overbearing, aggressive types of individuals, but quite often the best salespeople are personable, friendly, high trust, seems like great neighbors, that type of thing.
We have a sales expert that mentors some of our portfolio companies, and the CEOs consistently tell me after they get trained by him, they go, we found out that in our first meeting, instead of being aggressive and asking for the close, we backed off and just helped them solve their problems instead of asking for a close, and we got a close and sold more. It's exactly that kind of communication that you're talking about that really does effectively work. I like to say too, some people every once in a blue moon in my career have said, John, you're so detail oriented and you communicate so much, it's overwhelming. And I go, but 97% of the people appreciate it and like to know where they stand and what's going on. I think this world has way more problem with lack of good communication than too much communication. And so it kind of sometimes bothers me when people say, there's too much communication going on. And I'm sure that that can be true in some circumstances, in some places, but that is not the biggest problem in today's world. The biggest problem in today's world is people avoiding crucial conversations. That's another friend of mine who wrote the book Crucial Conversations. And you need to have crucial conversations and have more of that, not less of that.
The conversation is the relationship, and by a long shot, I think that's a Kim Scott quote too, which is crucial conversations, right?
Yeah.
I think that, making sure, and there's a good Napoleon quote where he says, don't attribute malice where you can incompetence. And to a lesser degree, it's that a lot of people are working to satisfy requirements rather than doing that little bit extra, and that little bit extra upfront or saying something an extra time is a defensive way to not build resentment or not build a rust around how you are perceived, so that you do operate at the highest possible speed of trust, I would say. And so, John, I really appreciate the chat. This has been the Conveyor Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great. And I'm sorry that the time was limited, but I want to tell you, I think this was a great conversation. And I think what you're doing is really important, because if I could say anything in business and entrepreneurship, one of the key things that we need to improve is communication. And let's go right to the heart of the matter. Founder to founder on a founding team, where there's great communication, there's great relationships. And when you get 2, 3, 4 founders pulling in the same direction instead of pulling in different directions, they can achieve almost anything. And that all starts with great communication. So I think it's really good, the message you're putting out.
Really appreciate it, John. Let me just pause this up here. I know